We've actually applied to Guinness for the greatest gap in the history of film between critics and filmgoers of 80 points.
Yeah, 80 points between critics and the people that actually saw the movie. What do you make of that?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? You know, I usually shoot for like 49 because that was what Mel got for The Passion of the Christ.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Dr. Phil podcast. I got to take a minute to thank everybody for absolutely blowing this platform up. Since I've relaunched this platform, you have exceeded all of our expectations. You obviously care about meaningful conversations. Be sure and click the subscribe and follow button. Today, you're in for a real treat because I'm talking to someone that I call friend. His name is Mark Joseph, and this is an interesting guy, to say the least. We're talking about an acclaimed music and film producer. He's a columnist, as well as the founder of MJM Entertainment Group. And his latest book is so intriguing. It is Making Reagan, a memoir from the producer of the Reagan movie, and really offers a behind-the-scenes look at the challenges and triumphs of bringing the story of Ronald Reagan's life to the big screen. And when I say challenges and triumphs, this gives you a look behind the scenes of a real big screen movie and some of the politics that go into it, and dealing with fraudsters and saboteurs and all the things that go. It's just absolutely intriguing. So, Mark, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's great to be with you, Dr. Phil.
This is, and first off, congratulations on the movie. We're going to talk about the book, but congratulations on the movie. Number one at the box office, 98% on Rotten Tomatoes. And aside from all that, just a great movie.
Well, we sure enjoyed our time with you out there when Dennis and I went out there to visit with you last fall, I think it was.
It was.
Yeah, and then after that came the movie. You forgot to mention the 18% critics at Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah.
By the way, we've actually applied to Guinness for the greatest gap in the history of film between critics and filmgoers of 80 points.
Yeah, 80 points between critics and the people that actually saw the movie. What do you make of that?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? You know, I usually shoot for like 49 because that was what Mel got for The Passion of the Christ, but I was not expecting 18%. But yeah, it's just an interesting commentary. Look, I think people are pretty smart and they can see those numbers and figure out what's going on. So I don't cry in my soup over it. But it's an interesting disengagement between the film goers and the critic community.
Well, you're not new at this. And look, just making a movie. Let's just say you were making a movie about sunshine. I mean, dealing with actors, dealing with financiers, dealing with all the things that go into navigating the shifting sands of Hollywood. You and I both been in that world for a long time. That's treacherous terrain in the best of circumstances, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I joke with my friends that if you have a young person in your life who wants to go into filmmaking, give them this book and you'll talk them out of it.
Yeah.
And they'll go into something sensible like dentistry or the law. It's incredibly difficult and it's treacherous. And so, the book really covers a lot of different areas. One of them is kind of in search of Ronald Reagan, trying to figure out who this guy was. And then the second is more the filmmaking process, all the things you talked about, the financiers who disappear and others who come alongside, and actors' schedules and so forth. But I think the primary thing that really interested me was, Ronald Reagan is really, really difficult to understand. There's a biographer named Edmund Morris who was hired to do the official Ronald Reagan biographer. And he finally threw up his hands and just said, I find the guy inscrutable, and sort of gave up and did a goofy book that was part fiction, part real. But this is a person who did not make it easy to be understood, but left breadcrumbs along the way. And so that was part of my challenge, was to talk to 50 or 60 of the people that knew him and worked with him and try to piece together who he was and tell the story.
As I say, you're not a rookie at this. When you came to do Reagan and you purchased the rights, you were not naive about this. You had produced some short films in particular that were not middle of the road. Some of them were controversial, like The Bridge, for example. Talk about that short film a little bit.
Yeah, well, I had been a part of, in one way or another, about 75 films. I worked at Walden Media. I think you may remember the Chronicles of Narnia, the Ray Charles movie, Because of Winn-Dixie Holes. So a lot of movies like that, Narnia was controversial in particular. I was helped to develop it and brought Disney on as our partner. Of course, the Passion of the Christ, I produced the soundtrack for that one. I didn't produce the film, but the soundtrack. But that one was, good grief, poor Mel endured so much on that one. So I had kind of been around films that had generated some controversy. But, with Reagan, I just wanted to treat him like a person, not a politician. And so it was similar to the Ray Charles movie that I'd been a part of when I was at Walden Media. We just wanted to treat him like a character. And, America is, we have a country that is so full of interesting characters all throughout history, Babe Ruth and Charles Lindbergh. And so I wanted to treat him like that and not get too deep into policy, but more about the man. And, during the process of finding a director, I remember one of my colleagues, Ralph Winter, who produced the X-Men movies. I was trying to find the director, and he said, well, what's your favorite movie? And I said, well, I've always loved Rocky since I was a kid. He goes, well, go find that guy. And I go, well, he's probably not alive anymore. And I did, and sure enough, he was out there. His name was John Avildsen. And John passed away before we started shooting, but John and I, at one point, he was going to direct Reagan. And John used to tell me, he said, don't forget that Rocky was never about boxing. It's about the man who happened to be a boxer. And he said, the Reagan movie has to be the same way. It has to be about the man who happens to be in politics. And so that's always the way we treated it. It's the story of the man overcoming the odds, facing so many challenges. And I love it when I've heard that critics have said that we were a hagiography of Reagan. And I'm thinking, did you guys watch the same movie that I made? Because in my movie, he gets dumped by his teenage sweetheart, who he was engaged to. She goes off to Europe and finds a better-looking guy and dumps poor Reagan. He then gets dumped by his first wife. He's left with 2 kids at 50 years old, washed up. His acting career is pretty much over. And he's sitting on a park bench with his mother saying, what went wrong with my life? You said I was going to be somebody great, and I don't think I'm going to be somebody great. And so it's really the comeback and how he comes back. So that was always how we treated the story, not as a politician, but as a great story.
You approached it that way from the beginning because you said that your interest in Reagan really deepened during a family vacation to Dixon, Illinois. What were you doing in Dixon, Illinois?
Oh, my goodness, Dr. Phil, you can't make this stuff up. I'm driving with my wife, and I had 4 little girls at that point, like between 0 and 6 years old. And we're driving through the Midwest to my cousin's wedding. And I'm suddenly pulled over for speeding in a minivan with 4 children and my wife. And it was a speed trap. And all of a sudden, what was 65 became 45. And so you get the idea. Well, I'm pulled over. This nice officer writes me the ticket. But he says, you have to appear in court. You're so far over the limit. You have to appear in person in court. And I, not to be a wise guy, but I'm like, I can't come back in a month, from California to Illinois for a speeding ticket. Can I just, pay the fine and go? And he goes, I'm sorry, but you're so far over the limit that you have to be in person. So I finally talked them into letting me come the next day, which means I've got 24 hours to kill. But as I looked at the ticket he wrote me, it says, you must appear in court in Dixon, Illinois. Well, I didn't realize I was driving through Ronald Reagan's hometown. Well, now I'm stuck in Dixon for the night, and I have nothing to do. So my family and I, we decided to make the most of it and went to the house Reagan grew up in and the place where he was a lifeguard. And I think that's when it hit me that I was supposed to do a movie about him, against my will, I guess. But what really hit me, Dr. Phil, was, our leaders come from ordinary places, and they're often from ordinary families. When you think about it, with the exception of the Roosevelts and the Bushes, most of our leaders are just ordinary people from ordinary places. And Dixon is a very, very ordinary place. And so it really struck me there, whether it's Ronald Reagan, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, Richard Nixon, you name it, fairly normal people. But our normal places give birth to really interesting and great leaders. And that's what really struck me by being in Dixon that day. So I have to thank that officer for the $500 fine he gave me that led to this movie.
$500? Good Lord.
Can you believe it?
You've heard me talk about Jace Medical. If not, listen up, because they're doing incredible work in medical preparedness. And today, I've got two major updates to share. First up, the ivermectin use case. You've probably seen the headlines calling it a wonder drug. The scientist who discovered it even won a Nobel Prize, and now Jace is offering a 30-day supply at the best price you'll find anywhere. Next, the upgraded Jace case. An emergency supply of antibiotics delivered to your door. They've doubled the number of medications to 10 at just $20 more. And now, the most comprehensive and affordable kit available. Get it before you need it. Don't wait, order today. Visit jace.com and use code PHIL at checkout for a special discount. That's JASE.com, code PHIL. You say that it was his childhood home and the Rock River beachfront where he saved 77 lives as a teenage lifeguard.
Right. We have some fun with that in the movie. You know, there was always some questions about that, right? Like some of these young ladies needed to be saved, unquote, quote unquote, saved by Ronald Reagan. So we have two rescues in the movie. One is a legitimate one where a guy's about to drown. And the other is a young damsel in distress who is not really in a whole lot of distress, but enjoys being saved by young Ronald Reagan. So again, as part of our having a realistic portrait of him, we wanted to show that both probably happened on his watch.
I love that you got the advice that Rocky was not a movie about boxing. It was a movie about a man that was a boxer. And that was really how I responded to the movie when I saw it the first time. And you really do see into Reagan, who went from such, as you say, ordinary background, ordinary upbringing to have such a profound effect, not just on America, but really on the world, and have like Reaganomics and so many things that have written on the slate that is America across time and have endured. And of course, so many of those things have been brought back to life now in this current time. And Dennis Quaid played Ronald Reagan, and it was interesting in talking to him about it. He didn't want to play Ronald Reagan in terms of imitating him. He kind of went at it in terms of portraying the character the way you went at producing the movie, which was from a place of authenticity. I think that permeated throughout the whole movie. Who else did you consider for the movie before you wound up with Dennis Quaid?
Well, you know, Dennis was always my first choice, but he wasn't available. He had a really busy schedule during that period. So I had to talk to other actors too. And in the book, I talk about others that we talked to. But, you know, Dennis was the first choice. But certainly like Nicolas Cage was somebody we had talked about with a lot of hair and makeup. I talked to him for about a year or so about it. But there were others along the way that we had talked to. Jim Caviezel was one. But it was always Dennis just has that, you know, Dennis is just camera ready. Honestly, he's got that grin. He's got that just great persona. So he was always choice number one. But I remember on the set, what was really remarkable about Dennis, and by the way, even the critics that didn't like the movie usually gave Dennis high marks for his portrayal. But I remember on the set, there were days that we would have to film in the same day, just because of the nature of the way we film. We'd be filming 1947 and 1987 in the same day, 47 in the morning, 87 in the afternoon. So I'd have to go up to Dennis and say, hey, don't forget you're 40 years younger now, or you're 40 years older now. So either, you know, speed up your cadence. Remember, your voice is lower or higher. So I have to constantly remind him about things like that. But he was so on point. He is just an incredible actor. He has a high, you know, emotional intelligence, but also his memorization skills. I was really blown away. And this is in the middle of COVID, you know, as we're all just kind of wandering around with masks on. and he was just remarkable. But I remember one day, and I would, just to really get the authenticity, I would sometimes send clips from the set. I would email them and text them to some of Reagan's aides and say, hey, how are we doing? And I remember one guy would come back and say, hey, do this or do that. But at one point, I remember saying to Dennis, just be Dennis Quaid. Don't try too hard to be Ronald Reagan, because you already have a lot of the characteristics that Reagan had. And some of that, Dr. Phil, are things like, both of their mothers were very, very devout religious women, Nita Quaid and Nellie Reagan. Fathers were alcoholic. At one time they were both married to superstars who got a little more popular than they were. Mm-hmm. Dennis would be the first to tell you he began to walk down the streets of New York City and people would scream out, Meg, Meg, even though he was there. And so a lot of similarities between the two that really kind of helped him kind of ease into the character of playing Reagan.
Yeah. And it's interesting, when I talked to him about it, he said it was really intimidating when he first took it on, because he said it was such a big character that it was not something that he wanted to try to be or emulate, but just kind of flow into conveying the messages and kind of let it flow through him. And I thought he did an amazing job about it. Now, like you said, you started this during COVID.
Right.
And you started in Guthrie, Oklahoma. You shot this whole thing in 37 days during COVID.
Yeah.
And did anybody ever get sick during the time?
Oh, good Lord, Dr. Phil. So we're about, 5 or 6 days in, and all of a sudden our makeup artist comes down with COVID, which is the worst possible person on the set because he's literally interacting with our stars. But he had been masked and double masked and crazy stuff. So it was contained. But because if you remember, the CDC rules at the time were just really over the top.
Yeah.
And so normally you would contact trace, right? So you'd say, okay, who are the 5 people that the makeup artist had contact with? And you'd isolate those people. But that wasn't the rules. The rules were the entire set shuts down for 10 days every time there's one person gets COVID. Which is just, again, it's just not even logical. So we have to shut down the entire set for 10 days. And remember, I have to pay salaries during that time. And that happened twice. So it was really, really tough. The second time we got the COVID. So when you all see Ron and Nancy kissing in the hospital room after he's shot at, it may look romantic to your viewers, but to me, all I can see is that was the moment of COVID transmission between Dennis and Penelope, Ron and Nancy, because they gave it to each other that final night of their shooting. And the next day, they both came down with COVID when they got back to California. So it was just a brutal, brutal time. But, I remember before we began shooting, my co-producer, John Sullivan, came to me and said, look, I need a decision. We either go forward and shoot this movie or we wait till COVID is over. And I remember thinking, I think it's the same probably for you too. We lost a lot of friends during that time. I had friends dying on me.
Yes.
And I thought, how pathetic would I be if we delayed this movie and I died before I could start shooting this movie after all these years of development? So I said, let's just go for it. I have no idea what that means, what it's going to cost, but let's just go. So we were the only major film that shot during, in the middle of COVID.
With so much going on in your life, it can be easy to neglect your diet. Balance of Nature fruits and veggies supplements have 31 ingredients made from fruits and vegetables. They're a fast and simple way to get a wide and colorful variety that fits right into your busy schedule. Just 3 fruits and 3 veggies supplements daily with some water, that's it. Whether you're off to spend time with your grandchildren or on your favorite hike, you can rely on these convenient supplements to be there every step of the way. Start your journey with Balance of Nature. Call 1-800-246-8751 or go to balanceofnature.com to get a free fiber and spice supplement, plus 35% off your first preferred set as a new preferred customer with free shipping and our money-back guarantee. Go to balanceofnature.com or call 1-800-246-8751 and get this special offer by using discount code Dr. Phil. That's DRPHIL. Like I said, it's tough making a movie just under normal circumstances. You do this
Right.
during COVID,
Right.
and then you've got a situation that's a hot potato in Hollywood because it's Republican. Reagan is, the quintessential Republican, and you've got complications because of Hollywood's disdain for Reagan. So you had actors dropping out for ridiculous reasons and other things, but you really ran into what you talk about in the book of just being a rogues gallery. And I think people are interested in what goes on behind the scenes in terms of swindlers, fraudsters, extortionists, just all of that. Pull the curtain back for people on that a little bit.
Well, I think the oddest thing was we would have some people who would pop up and say, I'd like to invest. And there was one group in particular that was going to do the whole thing. And so the reason that our film took so long was we had a number of these situations. And about 20 of us filmmakers were brought out to a special event, and we were unveiled, and they're going to finance all of our movies. And then this group, over the course of about a year, just disappears and goes bankrupt. And so there was a number of us. Mark Sciardi, who produced The Rookie, was another one of the films. And so we were all kind of left holding the bag as this group just appeared and disappeared. We had that happen a lot. But eventually, we found a great group of investors. And then Oklahoma was a huge help to us. That's where we shot the movie. And they had an incredible incentive program. So basically, every dollar you spend in Oklahoma, they will give you X number of cents on the dollar as a sort of a tax rebate. So that was really, really helpful. But no, it's a treacherous business. In our case, the way we make movies is we bring the finished films and then we partner with studios. So we had great partners, believe it or not. Universal took the film around the world. Lionsgate did the domestic, and then Showbiz did the theatrical. So great partnerships, but we tried not to make a Republican or Democrat movie. We tried to make a movie that was for everybody. And don't forget, Reagan spent more of his life as a Democrat than a Republican. He was a Democrat until the early 60s. And so that's the spirit we tried to make it in. Does politics come up? Sure, it's just part of the story. But really the focus, there's an important scene where, Jon Voight is the storyteller. Jon Voight playing a fictitious Russian Soviet KGB agent who's retired now. And the whole setup of the story is this young Russian leader comes to visit Jon Voight's character, Victor, because he wants to know how the Soviet Union lost to America. And in the middle of the story, as Victor is telling the story, Jon Voight, he says that, the American presidents lined up against us for many years in the Cold War, and that it was a Republican and Democrat united effort against the Soviet Union. And I think we forget about that. We're so busy fighting each other domestically that we forget that, we do have real enemies in the world. And they love it when we fight. Trust me, the North Koreans and the Iranians and the others, they love to see us arguing and fighting back and forth because it means they have a better shot at what they want to do against us. And so I think one of the lessons of the movie is let's not forget that we have more that unites us than divides us. And we have to remember that we have real enemies in the world who have a stake in us fighting each other all the time.
I thought there were some reminders in this movie about what's going on, even was going on then. It's a reminder of what's going on today, about the fact that there are people embedded in this country that are here. Maybe today they're gathering intel on our energy grid, or they're getting information about agricultural plans or whatever. But that's not just conspiracy theory. That was real, and that's been confirmed since then. And it was very real during the Reagan era.
Yeah, once the Soviet Union fell, we have access to their records. And so now we know what was true and what wasn't. And yes, it was true. They had agents all over the place, right? And the one thing I couldn't find was that they had, agents who were honeypots, that were, beautiful women that were there to lure Americans into, and get compromising positions. And I couldn't find anything like that on Reagan. I would have loved to have found something like that, or I would have put it in the movie. But we couldn't find that. But what we did find was that the Soviets began monitoring him in about 1947. And the reason they didn't typically care about actors in Hollywood, but they began to monitor him because he had testified before Congress in the committee hearings about communism in Hollywood. So that was the first mention of Reagan was in Izvestia, which is the Soviet newspapers around that time. And so over the next few years, they would make fun of his movies and give him bad reviews and kind of mock him. But that was the whole setup of the film that we made was we created an agent named Victor who he's the one guy who sort of spotted Reagan as a potential danger, but nobody else would take him seriously. And so his warnings went unheeded all those years. So that's the Hollywood part of our movie, was the creation of Jon Voight as Victor. By the way, I told John, this is going to be the greatest acting stretch of your career for Hollywood's biggest right-winger to play a communist. Yeah. That's about as tough of a role as it gets.
Exactly. But I think the reason some of this came across as authentically as it did is you said you interviewed 50 people.
I did.
That actually knew Reagan.
Yeah.
What were the kind of things you learned from those people? What did they tell you that gave you the insights to make him so real?
Yeah, that's such a great question because, again, that is the challenge here, was to try to understand him. And, it was people like Ed Meese and George Schultz who passed away since then. And also just, random people that I would meet. But it was probably 50-55. I think the biggest challenge for me was everybody loves Reagan and he's Mr. Perfect. And I'm like, guys, this is not interesting. We have to find either the dark side or something going on with the character, or else it's not interesting. Superman without Clark Kent is just not that compelling. What makes it so interesting is that the transformation that happens and that they're both the same person. And so that was what I was looking for. Now, I couldn't find dirt on him. Not that I was looking for dirt, but he just was a genuinely nice guy. But the challenges he faced and the difficulties he overcame, that was really what we settled into. Now, I will say that I did get some good stuff from one of his aides, Peter, I forgot his last name, but he wrote a book on Reagan, and he was an aide back in the 70s. And it was funny. I said, Peter, you've got to give me something human about him. Nobody's perfect. And I said, what would make him angry? Would he get angry? And he said, yeah, he would have a quick flash of temper and then it would pass. And I said, well, give me an example. And he said, well, one day we overscheduled him. And I gave him the schedule for the day. And he said, Reagan looked at it and he threw his glasses across the table. And he said, fellas, I cannot do all this in one day. And then it quickly passed. And so I'm like, okay, that's good. That gives us something to hang our hats on. And if you notice in public life, there's 2 times when he loses his temper like that, kind of. The first time is when he says to the group, I paid for this microphone, Mr. Breen, because they wouldn't let somebody else debate. And the second was the very last day of the campaign in 80 in San Diego. He's just about had it with his heckler. And this heckler won't stop. And finally, Reagan just leans in and says, shut up. And it's a human moment, right? It's like, okay, he's just like the rest of us. He's not Mr. Perfect. And so that helped a lot. But as far as the film is concerned, it's really about overcoming failure and having a lot of, and not necessarily failure, but like almost successes. You're almost a great actor, but not quite. Almost a great broadcaster, but not quite. And not reaching your destiny until you're 69 years old.
Yeah, and at the time, he was the oldest person to ever be elected president, right?
Correct, yeah. By a long shot. Yeah, back in those days, people didn't live as long, and so 69 was a big deal. And in the film, he loses, when he's 65, he loses to Gerald Ford, and he really felt like that was his last shot. And so there's a great moment in the film. And again, I got a lot of these anecdotes from the people that were with him. And I was talking to the guy who was there. He said he was there the moment that Reagan lost to Ford. And I said, well, what did he say to you? He says, well, he turned to me and said, I guess it wasn't God's will. And so we got into that level of detail of being able to get those stories right.
What did you get in terms of the people that knew him, family, others that really were Reaganites? What was their reaction to the movie once they saw it?
Yeah, there was 2 things that really stood out for me. One was to have Dennis Quaid, who's been in 152 movies. I mean, think of the movies he's been in. You and I have watched a lot of them, I'm sure, from The Rookie to Frequency. For Dennis Quaid to tell me this is the favorite movie of his career, that's a big deal for me as a producer. It doesn't get much better than that. We were traveling one day. I'll never forget. We were out in your neck of the woods in Texas, and he did an interview in the morning, and he said it was his second favorite movie. And by 3:00, he said it was his favorite movie. So something happened in those 5 hours that brought it from number 2 to number 1.
Yeah.
But that was really gratifying. And I would say second would be Mike Reagan. Mike came out to the premiere, Reagan's son. And, look, I had no idea what Mike was going to say. He could have said this movie's terrible and how dare you, whatever. I just don't know. I mean, I've known Mike for years, but he's not going to spare me of his true feelings. And he called me up the next day or texted me the next day, and he said, if only my brother and sister could watch this movie, they'll finally understand Dad. And I thought, oh, man, that's about as good as it gets from his son. And so I was particularly concerned because, Mike's mother, Reagan's first wife, Jane, she's a little of a tough character in the movie, right? So I just didn't know if I was going to offend Mike with that. But he said, nope. He goes, you nailed her. Yeah, that's exactly the way she was. He said one day, just to give you an idea of what she was like, he said one day that Reagan had a speech on TV when he was president, and he called his mother up, Reagan's ex-wife, and he said, Mom, what did you think of the speech? And he said, Mom said, I didn't like those speeches back then, and I don't like them now. So that's the way their relationship was. But she did vote for him twice, but she didn't like his speeches.
Yeah. Well, that's real, though. I mean, that's what people need to know. That's what they need to hear.
Yeah, she was a tough character, and we in the movie, Mina Suvari did an incredible job of playing Jane, and just, a lot of an edge, not a little bit of an edge. She was tough, and she did not like the politics. Interestingly, she was a Republican, and of course, he was a Democrat back then. So, but she didn't like his involvement in the Screen Actors Guild. She wanted to be an actor. She hadn't signed up for him being a political type. And all of a sudden, he was becoming that. And I just don't think she could have taken him to where he needed to go. It was almost like that was Nancy Reagan's role. And somebody had joked, I think it was Reagan's son had joked that if it wasn't for Nancy Reagan, Ronald Reagan would have been the host of Unsolved Mysteries, like Robert Stack, and couldn't have reached his destiny. So a lot of it is about destiny. And that, each of us has a purpose, something we're supposed to do in life, and we need help to get there.
I didn't have the privilege of knowing Ronald Reagan, but I did have the privilege of knowing Nancy and having dinner with her.
She watched your show.
Yes, she was a big fan of the show, and would argue vehemently about how things should be handled, and she was very opinionated.
Right.
People wondered how much he depended on her and how much she ran the country versus him running the country, particularly towards the end. What was your intel on that in talking to these 50-plus people?
Yeah, look, we wanted to really make sure that the viewer knew that we had the integrity of not being beholden to anybody. So even though we had great friends up at the Reagan Library and the museum, and we were not ever in any situation where we had to have script approval by anybody or Mrs. Reagan or family members or anything like that. We were totally free to tell the story. But she did. I sent her a nice note just saying, "Hey, here's what we're doing," and she said, "Great, thank you for letting me know." We don't endorse projects or whatever, which is fine. That's what we wanted. But she just asked that I send up a note whenever we were doing something or making an announcement. So I would send up a note saying, hey, next week we're announcing such and such. That was the extent of it. But look, she was a very powerful woman in the traditional sense. There's a scene in the film where if you look carefully, she's talking to Reagan on Air Force One about Iran-Contra and what she thinks he should do. And she's kind of yelling at him, but she quickly turns around to see if anybody else is listening. And that's one thing that her aide told me she would often do. She would talk, directly to Reagan, but only the two of them when it was just the two of them. She would never do it or dress him down in front of other people, sort of to spare his dignity. And so we even captured little things like that. And, Penelope Ann Miller, who played Nancy, she just really threw herself into the role as Dennis did and researched and read books and talked to her aides. And, of course, then I would bring in folks to watch it. I brought in their longtime aide of 10 years, Peggy Grande, when we had a first cut. And I said, hey, are we capturing this? And she said, absolutely, this is how they were with each other. So, it was really a challenge to get all that down and make sure for the viewers that the viewer can know that we were not carrying water for anybody. We just wanted to tell the story as accurately as possible. But the characters is really what it's about. And Nancy is just such a great and interesting character. A bit of angst as you watch it. You can see Penelope kind of channeling that angstiness. Almost, she had to make up for Reagan's lack of angst by having some extra angst on her part.
So when it was all said and done, and the cast looked at it, and I assume they did, how did they feel about the end product? How did Dennis and Penelope and John and Justin and Dan, I mean, how did they all feel about it?
Well, we had a great, fun premiere at the Chinese Theater in Hollywood. And of course, I said Michael Reagan came, and there his mother's footprints and handprints were there where we were having our premiere. So we had a great time. Yeah, Dan Lauria, who played Tip O'Neill. I forgot to mention Dan. He was there as well. And he was such a great character. And, I also wanted to mention, Phil, that when we were on set, again, we were in the middle of an election year for the first part of our filming. And I have actors all over the map on this movie in terms of their own views, right? It was funny because one day John Voight would go off to a studio and record one of his pro-Trump little 5-minute vignette videos. And then I'd have Mark Moses, another of our actors, flying to Montana to do a fundraiser for the Democratic nominee for the Senate. So we were all over the map in terms of our cast. And yet we all functioned, we got along, we had a job to do. And everybody set aside whatever their differences were in the middle of an election year. And I think that's what we have to get back to as a country. We have to be able to set aside our differences and work together to achieve a common goal. And that's what we pulled off. And so, our actors were happy with the work. And I involved Dennis and Penelope in particular. They were able to see an earlier cut and kind of help to shape it and guide it as well. So it was really a collaborative process between myself, director, the writer, some of our actors, and really make sure we were getting it right. I'll just tell you one thing in our test screenings that we figured out early. Initially, you didn't meet Dennis Quaid until 25 minutes into the movie, right? Because we were doing the childhood. And, our test audience were like, hey, we came to see Ronald Reagan and Dennis Quaid. What's going on here? And so we realized we had to move that assassination attempt up to the beginning because people really wanted to see how Dennis was going to handle Reagan. And I think he pulled it off.
I think that was a good adjustment because you're right. I mean, people want to see, they're curious, and he was so spot on. In fact, you kind of see him different. I told him one of the things is I've never caught him acting. That's kind of my measure when I watch people, and sometimes people overact, sometimes they're struggling, but I've never caught him acting, and I sure never caught him acting in this movie. Wow. It just seems so natural.
That's a great compliment, for you to say that about him. Yeah, he's just a tremendous, he's a national treasure. He really is, and we've been with him on so many of his pictures, and just to see his life, as you know, in the last few years, he's really he got married to a wonderful young woman. I talk about her in the book as well, and put out a gospel record, and he's just really just a tremendous person.
Well, I've known him for, I guess 20 years. We've played golf a number of times and hung out and had lunch and just visited and stuff. I've watched him evolve across these years, and always fun, always gracious human being. And I don't think he would have played this character as well even 5 years ago.
Correct.
This came at the right time for him personally, in my view.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. It's funny, though, because in the 1964 speech that Reagan gave, it's called The Speech, Dennis and his dad listened to the speech in real time driving down the highway there in Houston, Texas. And that's the stuff that you just can't make up.
Yeah.
And his mother was 92 years old. She passed away before we began filming, but he had called her and said, I'm up for this role. And she was so excited about it. But I have to brag on his wife, Laura. So when he first started dating her, one day he called me up and he said, hey, I'm dating this girl named Laura. And so I meet her, and, there's a big age gap between them if you read the tabloids, whatever. But I meet her, and I remember putting in my phone, I put her name and then I put Quaid, and I said, Dennis, you cannot let her go. She is amazing. And she's been a huge part of what you've talked about this last several years in his life. She's been an incredible rock for him. And just sent to really help him and compliment him. And it's been a great partnership. So she was a big part of what we did as well.
Yeah. Well, I can't let you go without finding out what's next for you.
Well, I can't say who, but I have 2 rock stars in mind that I'm developing. I said, I'll give you the Ronald Reagan treatment. And so 2 names that you would recognize, but I can't wait to come back on and talk to you about it. But we're just in the development phase and writing treatments and telling their stories. But rock and roll and redemption. There's some great stories out there too.
Well, don't forget about us. Let us know when you're ready to talk about it. You're really great to pull the curtain back on this and let people know. And if you haven't read the book, Making Reagan, then do, because if you're a fan of film, this will give you great insight about what goes on behind. And let me tell you, as I say, Mark is no rookie coming into this. He's been involved in dozens and dozens of films and short films, plus music and all before this. And anybody that hadn't been would have never gotten this done. It would have, there were so many opportunities for this to fail and not get made. But it took a pro to get it done, and he got it done. And God bless you for doing it, because it is a work of art. It will stand the test of time. And you had the right person at the right time to play the role, and you had the right person at the right time to make the movie. And thanks for telling us about it. Thanks for pulling the curtain back. You want to buy the book, you want to see the film. And you'll watch it more than once, by the way, because there are nuances in there you won't pick up the first time that you will pick up, particularly watch the movie, read the book, and then watch the movie again, and you'll be astounded at what you pick up the second time through. Mark, thanks for spending time with us.
Thank you, Dr. Phil. Hope to see you soon.
All right, we'll see you soon, man. So long. Hey, Dr. Phil here. My network, Merit TV, has it all.
Now, let me blow your mind.
Merit TV's got the news that matters.
The selection of a new pope.
Entertainment you crave.
Busted.
Everybody in a good mood today?
And live events.
Surprise.
What am I, chopped liver?
With serious punch.
Big shot.
Go to merittv.com and download the Merit TV app today.